be your own, to have your own persona, if you will, shining through the imagery. When I'm out with my camera, I want to be fully in the moment. I think we just naturally have this deeper awareness that kicks in. We're observant. We can see harmonically. We're making compositions. And I think that's when I'm the happiest in life. I'm totally lost in that moment where I'm making those creative decisions that are going to make a really, really unique shot. Before I show you any images, I want to talk about how many images we see in a day. We're bombarded with so much stuff that's from outside of ourselves. I think it's nice just to have each of us start with a mentally blank canvas. And before we even pick up our cameras to take a picture, before we go out, I know you guys have some really wonderful trips planned. They're coming up. Before you even go out, I would take a minute and think about what you as an individual really, really love about your photography. And the first thing to consider is your format. This is the 2:3 ratio. That's the size of 35 millimeter film, slide film, print film. The spool that ran through our cameras, luckily, all had this beautifully harmonic design, and I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful that they made it this shape and not some other permutation of a rectangle. And that's because it really does give you a beautiful format to compose with, whether they're horizontal or vertical. I try to use that full frame, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. I know I've talked with you guys about that before, but I really think it's the most important aspect of photography is to use that area that we're given. This is a series that I started a long time ago, and I still continue to this day to shoot images that would fit in this category. I made a really, really short artist statement that said the intent of this series is to show the shape and geometry of natural forms and the way they grow and unfurl. This is best illustrated through the black and white photographic process, as the contrasts show us the perfection of these living forms. And that's really what I try to do throughout, is to let the black and white be the consistency that held it together. So basically every image that will go into this series will always be black and white. Now I can have another one that's color, and I can have another that's sepia, or different tonalities. But for this one, when I show them, I want to have that consistency. I don't want to switch from color to black and white and get jarred out of that reverie of seeing things in this continuing series. And because I had more, I got to do this really cool project. When I started working with galleries and publishers and with some advertising people, if they found one of my shots that they really liked, they would always say, "Oh, wow, this is great. Do you have any more? Do you have any more?" So I learned to work in a series so that people would have options where they could design an interior space, or they could have a continuation of images that could be used together. So what they did was they printed these on these really, really big silk panels. So they were semi-transparent, and the models could walk in front of them and behind them. This was the background. And then some of the ones that were more intricate were in front. So it sort of made this layered effect. And so you could see people walking in front and behind, and it was really, really cool. So luckily, I had more than one that would fit together. And that's why I'm always saying, oh, if you have one shot you really like, do another one to match it, do another one, and so on. So back to our magical frame, it really is a harmonic area. Don't ignore it and try to compose full frame. And just by doing that, all of this magical stuff starts to happen. And when we're out in nature, the forms of nature are all built on these really divine proportions. So just by getting closer, getting the objects in your frame to fit kind of in those edges, this magical ratio kicks in, and your images are just beautiful right out of the camera. You don't have to crop, you don't have to after crop, big portions of your image away and lose pixels.
Robin, can we ask questions?
Oh, please. I love questions. Yes.
Were those done with film or digital?
These
Claiborne, yes.
These were done with film,
Uh-huh.
and it was 35 millimeter film, and that's why I could print them, really, really big at the time. Mm-hmm. But some of these were originally outside, and I know these are really tiny, forgive me, but these three were sort of like the series within the series, and it was windy. So I brought them inside and put them on a light table, so it was really, really flat, and I could sort of get the transparency of the leaves over each other, which is another thing why I think they liked it for the transparent part of the curtain, because it was so flat. So if you guys are outside and you're trying to do stuff like this and it's windy and you want to, get flowers or anything, all this stuff is going to be coming out in the spring, and bring it back inside and work on a light table or against a window, or have window light. That's really fun too, and then you don't have to worry about the wind blowing. But you can't do it at Mount Arabia with Generio, because those plants, those really cool rare plants that are out there, are protected and you can't remove them. So if it's okay to pick stuff and bring it in and have that control of having it inside, I think that's a really nice way to work. But Daryl, I did shoot those on film. As I continue that series, I'm shooting it in digital, and then I'm converting it in black and white to still match that tonality, so that it still fits together.
Thanks.
Thanks for asking. Please, y'all ask me questions. I love it. The other format is the square that I have really, really learned to love, and any permutation of the square. So as many squares as you can fit together, it's going to have that harmony. And if you're kind of saying, okay, well, I'm going to crop it and it's almost a square, when you look at it, it will be a little bit off. So, use your shift key or whatever when you draw a perfect square, to make sure that it really is equal on all sides. And when we look at how this starts to happen, this one, and I was not trying to do this, but the horizon line created the 2:3 ratio rectangle on the top, and then along the bottom, those all subdivide into equal squares. So, we're not going out saying, oh, I'm going to make this fit and have these proportions. Just as you start to think this way, it will naturally start to happen.
Was that France?
Yes. Yes. I hope we can go. We're not going to go in May this year, but we're going to go back and do the Languedoc photography workshop. Maybe in October. Definitely it's on the calendar for next May. But this is a place that we always go to photograph the white horses the Camargue region. And it's just extremely picturesque. But the setup really is dependent on clouds. So even during my workshops, if I can switch a day when I know that there are going to be clouds as opposed to, you know, no clouds or, you know, terrible rain, I try to keep that flexibility. And they've been really kind to work with us. And I picked this day because we were supposed to get good clouds, and we did. And really this image would not work if it were not for the cloud. The horizon is not straight. I went back and straightened it, and it didn't. I should have put an example of that in here, but it didn't work. But there's something about that intersection of that stick he's holding with the horizon line, and the cloud is making this really, really perfect circle within the square. If the cloud did not have that tension up at the very top, it wouldn't work. So really what I'm trying to do is to compose that in the camera, design using all of the given image area as I'm out there taking the photograph, you know, so edge to edge, corner to corner. That's when our images get stronger and stronger. And from the Coastal Georgia workshop, this was an exercise on filling the square. And in this case, I was actually composing in a square so I could see, but it was really important that the trees really be the whole substructure, you know, corner to corner. And then the subject is really just a very, very small part of it. So the people in the distance in the lighthouse, even though they're the subject, they're a very small part of the overall design. And that was an exercise that we were doing to play with that, filling the frame in camera. Clouds have this really eerie ability to mimic other things in the shot. And if you start to go back and look at clouds, and yes, you know, you can go back and see all these fantastic shapes there. But I find that they actually start to mimic what is in the photograph. So the one on the left, the sky is actually making all of the lines and shapes that we see in the landscape. And then in the formal garden on the right, if you look, that cloud looks like it's actually morphing into that foo dog statue in the background. And when I first saw it, it was so eerie, it kind of shocked me. And if you honor clouds and let that be an important part of your image, I think that that adds a whole other level of interest. When I look at cloudless, solid blue sky, then I feel like I need to go back and add some clouds. But then if the light sources and the type of clouds don't match the scene, it always looks a little bit strange to me. But I find that on days without any clouds, I tend to crop the entire sky out, or maybe just a sliver of the horizon line. But I just don't really want a solid blue expanse there unless there's some other reason, something else that's balancing it compositionally in the shot. And this one, it's the clouds. That's the subject. And if you want to read more about why we love to compose in camera, it's on my robindavis.com website under blog. And it talks about the energetic moment when the shot is happening. And I think that when we look at each other's photographs and we really communicate with each other by showing our photographs to each other. And when you look at an image and you think, okay, I really get the energetic moment of this image. It was something that happened when you took it. And yes, it's wonderful to go back and do work in Photoshop and create and change things there. I do that all the time. But there's something about that spark, that actual moment when you take the image that we feel. I mean, I know when I look at your work, which I love looking at all of you guys' photographs, I see that spark of you, of your real persona in it. And that's to me what really, really makes it interesting. Another thing that I was getting into in this talk was working in a series, and it's springtime. Nature is just, I was up on my roof today and enjoying the sun, and the trees are starting to bud. This is a great time to get out with your camera. And if you decided that you did want to create a series of 1 or 2, 3 images that fit together, I think that's a really, really great exercise to do. And choosing your tonality is a big part of that. I love this blue-green kind of color. I keep going back to it again and again. And it sort of has a pastel kind of feel to it. But it's still color, you know, it's a simplified color palette. But I don't want anything in this series that doesn't have this color. If you go and really look at these images, and this was an exhibition that was up at Mason Fine Art and at PB&J Gallery in Kirkwood, and these were square canvases, and it was on the wall in this pattern, exactly like this on the wall. And it was important to me that it be that way, because there's a balance in there. Every one of these photographs has a matching pair. So if there's something in one, it will be in another one. And as you start to look, you'll start to see these common things that unite them as pairs. But overall, it's the color palette that made them also fit together.
Couple questions.
Yes.
Robin, you climb up on your roof? You said you're up on your roof.
Oh, I have a flat place where you can go out. It has a little balcony, and
Oh, okay.
but
Second
I've
thing
been
is,
to it.
since you don't like cropping, does that mean these were shot with something like medium format?
no, these were actually shot with my phone, with my iPhone, set as a square format. So I'm actually looking, you know, I'm looking in you know, here, and it is a square. So I'm, you know, moving it around.
You know Michelle Simmons of our group? Michelle, who does all iPhone photography.
I love it.
I see. Oh, yeah.
I really, really have enjoyed it. And with the app I have, I can put these film borders on it, so it makes me feel like I'm still in the film era. This is a series that I'm going to continue, and I hope to have more to show you guys, but I want to do these really simplified nature details in a pastel color range. So what I did was expose for the higher key spectrum. And in photography, next to composing in camera, I think the most control that we can have in our photographic practice for creativity is exposure. And sometimes I'll make things purposefully very dark, and sometimes I'll make them overly light. So to get these colors, I overexposed on a cloudy day. And I'm just starting to lose a little bit of detail in the highlights on the one on the left, I think. But if it was on a bright sunny day where there were really hot spots of light coming in, then that would blow out and be just areas of complete white. So to do this kind of tonality by intentionally overexposing, it really needs to be an even overcast day.
Hey, Robin, you're not totally depending on capture in the camera to give you these pastels, are you? I mean,
Yes.
production plays a part in it, doesn't it?
When you make it lighter, then it intentionally lighter, it gets these kind of groovy, trippy pastel colors. And it's this is with Fuji. I think I did this with the Fuji, but I had an old lens retrofitted on it, and the tonality was created by making it lighter than I normally would. And I normally make things overly dark, like this one. I intentionally made this too dark to get.
Italy?
Yes. This is in Tuscany, near where we are based for the Italy workshops that I do every year. Well, not last year and this year, but
Yeah.
to
So
be back again soon.
You had an old lens fit to a Fuji digital?
Yes. And I was very interested in hearing about your ideas with different lenses, the old portrait lens that you were talking about, and all of that. I am obsessed with putting old glass on modern digital cameras. We talked about that the last Saturday. Every second Saturday of the month, actually, we have a photo party, which is a discussion on different creative aspects of photography. And we looked at old lenses and what they will do. And a lot of them actually change the tonality of your, of your colors. And it doesn't look, normal. It doesn't look correct. But I had this real problem with digital where I was losing the mood and mystery of the kind of images that I wanted to take. And I found that the old lenses would give me a different color palette, and would also, there would be vignetting on the edges, on the corners would get darker, but it didn't bother me. I liked that lighter in the center effect. And this probably is two stops darker than what my camera would tell me the setting needed to be, right? So I can go back and make it darker later if I need to in Photoshop, of course, but there's something about, I don't know if I want to torture myself or what, but when I'm in the moment, I want to try to make as many effects happen as I can. And here's another example of that. These are two photographs taken on the same day at our coastal Georgia workshop. The one on the left, I wanted it to be the color of sand and have that sandy kind of sepia overall feel. But that's with a digital infrared camera, where the camera often had the sensor converted to infrared. But I also overexposed it to make it very light and airy. And then the image on the right is also infrared, and I made it very contrasty, and of course, converted that one to black and white. So depending on what you're doing, what you're making your camera do, you can get all of these really different extreme effects.
Incidentally, Life Pixel, who does infrared conversions, has a very big sale on right now, 20% off.
And that's who did mine. That's who did my conversion too. I've really enjoyed it. And if you guys have an older digital camera that you're not using and you want to send it and get it converted, I'll have to look up the one that I got, but there's one variation of it where you can use your light meter through the camera. And Daryl, you may remember which one that is.
Yeah, I think I have that one. Full color or something. They do a nice job on their website of
They
telling
do.
you about all the options.
I highly recommend them. So keep that in mind. This was shot on Fuji slide film. And there was that whole tonality range that Fujifilm had where you could see blues and purples and greens. And if you would shoot it with Kodak film, it would be more to the yellow, warm kind of tonality range. So I loved the coolness of this. It was foggy. It really did look purple. And when I made it darker, the colors got richer and more jewel toned. And I had an interior designer see this, and she's like, "Oh, the purple landscape. Do you have any more?" And I was able to go through and find some other marsh shots that had that sort of purple tonality and brought those out, and we printed them really big on canvas. And she put them in like these big ornate kind of frames in a dining room. So I think the reason that she picked it is because it's a very traditional landscape. The only thing that's different is that the color is just a little bit odd, you know.
Yeah, it's not Velvia. I don't think Velvia would do that, would it?
No, this was
Some people in our group know, I'm sure.
it was the 400 ASA Fuji slide film. Is that right? It's Fuji.
Yeah, I only know of them. Some of our members may know.
But I used to shoot that film all the time, and then I would underexpose it and then push process it to try to get a little bit more grain in it because I wanted it to break up. I wanted it to have a painterly kind of feel to it.
Lomography now sells a range of rather odd films for both 35 millimeter and 120.
Wow. I'm so happy to know that. You know, I still occasionally will find something that I was like, okay, this really deserves film, and I'll break it out.
Can you hear me, Robin?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. It's Fuji Velvia 50 ASA film.
This is the 400 ASA.
Oh, okay,
okay.
Yeah, I would, but
that
would be 400. That'd be 400. There's a name for it. It's not Velvia. Velvia is with a 50 ASA.
It's like Fuji Chrome or something like that.
Something like that. It starts with an S. I can't remember offhand what the name is, but
it's going to drive me crazy until
I know what it is because I've used it before. I was a big Velvia person for a long time. Well, yeah, just Fuji in general.
But I was depending on the film to give me these colors. On this, I was depending on the infrared sensor, you know, to give me these effects in the camera. The other thing that's so wonderful about nature photography is that if there's a part that is not totally beautiful and you don't want to see it, you can blur it out by putting the focus where you want it and then letting the rest just disappear. So if there's a background, if there are some scraggledy bushes in the background that aren't beautiful, they go away, they magically disappear. And here I was very careful just to focus on the very, very tip of the image, you know, I mean, of the part that was closest to me. And I would focus as close as I could And then to get the focus right, I would just physically move in and out closer, you know, to my subject, back and forth, until I got the sharpness right where I wanted it. Here, there was a bunch of scraggly weeds in the foreground. So I back focused, and everything that was ugly in the foreground magically went away. And of course, you know, in Photoshop, you could go in and blur it if you wanted to. And again here, this is an Italian duck. I didn't want to see the weeds in the foreground, so I back focused, and the weeds in the foreground became sort of this, you know, blurred curtain that you're peeking through. This was also at just after sunset, so it was pretty dark, and that gave me that blue purple tonality naturally. So this was not enhanced. That's what it really looks like, because it was so so into the deep twilight. So in nature, I'm totally drawn to personal symbols. You know, I get into this almost meditative Zen-like state where I can see shapes and colors, and I'm truly in this reverie, you know, where I can see shapes that if I didn't have my camera, I don't think I would notice them, you know. But I think when you're out there walking around with your cameras, think about your personal symbols. There's a lot in nature that really speaks to me. And there's certain animals, like if you have an animal that you really like, you know, they will appear. And now that the weather's been nicer, I've been out walking with Bill, my husband, and there is this hawk that follows him around. And I was like, "Oh, Bill, that's your soul animal. He's following you." He says, "Yeah, I must look like a good dinner to him, you know." But if I go by myself or around the neighborhood with somebody else, we never see it. And to really be serious about this, I mean, I'm making a joke about it, but if you have an idea, if you have something that you have a polarity to, and you go out with your camera, it will find you. You will have really amazing coincidences
Aren't they
happen.
called familials? Familiars.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So Jennifer Cardinal in our group has this thing where she attracts foxes, apparently.
Yes, I saw that when I judged the images. She had that magical photograph of the mother fox, and it was amazing. But yeah, I mean, I would say she has a true connection. That's her soul animal. And the fox is very, I mean, going way back in every culture, there's a story about the fox, you know. So it's a very powerful symbol. And I think when you go out with your cameras, if you're thinking about what you like and what you're drawn to, then there's this really this polarity, this attraction where you'll draw it to you. And I don't mean like, oh, you're thinking about it, so you're paying more attention and you might see it. Things will really start to appear in your images. So I think it's a wonderful time to get out with your cameras and to dig deep and pause and really reflect on what you want to see in your pictures, and it will appear. The other thing that's cool, because there's the serendipity of things that happen when you have your camera, but on the other side, beforehand, you can pre-plan the kind of images that you want. And I think I showed you this series before, but I was going to create these tapestries where I took two images. One was the pattern that I would cut and split apart, and then insert a bird photograph in the middle. And the idea is that it would be printed on silk and sewn into tapestries. And it was called Aqua Avia, and it was all water birds, and it had to have elements of air and water, because that was the elements of the birds. And they were in the air and then they were in water. And as it started out, it was very difficult. This was on film too. I shot so much film, and the one here on the left was one of my favorite ones. I used one of those very inexpensive mirror lenses, and you have to focus it yourself, which you have to practice, and you have to I think it's, you can only have f11, f8 or something like that. You can't change it. You can't change the aperture on that lens. But the thing that the mirror lens does is it makes the background very, very painterly. So behind that egret, in real life, that was a very ugly swamp. There was mud, there was ugly, offensive shrubbery, there were sticks, and it was not attractive. The ones that I shot with the mirror lens, however, it did away with that background and made it very painterly. And then where I was focused on the bird, that was very, very sharp. So I'm letting the lens do the work for me. Then the second shot of the abstract pattern is just a reflection in the water. So at the same time I was photographing the birds, I would, and I had a different camera for that, I would just shoot straight down or out into the water to get, to get these patterns.
Are these the sort of lenses that look like a donut?
Yes, yes. And if you look at the lens, it has a little black circle in the middle of it.
Right. Yeah.
And so the mirror.
It's built like a refractive telescope.
Yes,
Thanks,
thank you.
Genario.
That's it.
No, reflecting telescope, not refracting, reflecting.
That sounds good.
Yeah, well, a mirror would be reflective.
That's why they call it a mirror lens. It's reflecting internally.
Right.
So
And they
yeah,
are really inexpensive, but they make strange pictures, which may be what you're after.
yeah, it's exactly what I was after. And if I think all of these that I ended up using for the show, the first exhibition of this was at Mason Muir. It's now Mason Fine Art. But it was probably the hardest thing I ever did, because the birds were horrible models. They were not cooperative at all. But I knew that I was going to print it on silk. That was one of the things I knew up front. So if you're thinking about experimenting with printing on glass or wood or metal or tile, I have a piece outside that I printed on tile that can stay outside in the weather, or you could even put it in your shower if you wanted to make a photograph that you could, grout into your shower. You could do that, and it's very permanent. It's not supposed to deteriorate for 500 years.
Robin,
Yes.
is there anybody who's used fracture to print on glass?
No, what is it?
It's advertised on television now.
It's advertised all over the place. It's printing on glass, and I don't know if I know some people have printed on glass here, but I don't know anybody that's used fracture. I'm just curious about it.
Well, I was thinking, when you guys have the upcoming competition is glass, it would be cool to print on glass.
Oh, it would be, except it's going to be digital. So.
I have a sister who lives
Robin, have you done anything with backlit photo material The old one was Kodak Duratrans, and the new one is Fuji. The current one is Fuji backlit film. Do you know anything about either one? Do you use either one?
I have not used either of those where I have printed on it. If you look at this one, the girl up here that's on glass, this was like a plexi that was part of an installation that was backlit. And Color Chrome printed that for me. They were big, and they were, like windows. But it was a hard, it was hard, it was like a piece of plexiglass.
Yes, yes. Well, I'm interested in doing some work. I've been in touch with Color Chrome. Thank goodness they're here because nobody else does it. Anyway, I'm interested in some things with small light boxes with my picture done on the special material for backlighting. You can't do it with a paper print because the paper texture shows through and the density of the dyes and so on is wrong.
Mm-hmm. I've had wonderful luck with Color Chrome, and even if I was printing on a different surface, I would make a print on paper. I mean, if it was something that I could print myself, I would just make a small one and say, I know you're printing on a different surface, but I hope to have this tonality, I want the colors to kind of look like this. And they've been good at making adjustments to, even though it was on a different surface, to still keep the colors and the contrast and things that I wanted. So I've had really good luck working with them. And the other stuff that you were talking about, the other products, I have not used them, but I think it's a great thing. Even if you just make small little test prints first, that's been a great way to try different methods, and then then you can pick the one you like the best.
So Color
The
Chrome
backlit things I'm talking about have been used for many years in commercial displays in stores and so on, and seldom used as art.
The Duratran.
Duratrans was Kodak's trade name. It was a wet process color negative material that had a diffusion white plexi plastic base, not a paper base. It was flexible, but it was intentionally a diffusion base so the patterns of the light wouldn't show through. It would even up the illumination from the backside of the emulsion. Anyway, Kodak doesn't make anything anymore, but they certainly don't make that. But Fuji makes something similar.
So Color Chrome is a company?
Yeah, Color Chrome Atlanta. It's the biggest printing lab you've ever seen. They do things like scenery for theater. They do things like these fabrics that can be stretch fitted onto buses and automobiles.
Oh.
And anything small or large, but anything commercial using a graphic printing technique, they can do it. But again, most of their business is commercial.
I was trying to go back and see. They actually used this series, Color Chrome did, to this nature series to print on different materials. So, and I'll have to get it and show it to you guys. And hopefully we can get together soon because it's really cool to see in person. But they made a box of these images printed on glass, mirror, metal, wood, plexi, the Duratran material that you're talking about, and it was great for me because I got to see, firsthand what it all looks like. But they made it into a box for clients, where they could show different, different printing different printing processes, but this was made into a backlit thing like you're talking about. And they may still have it there. This was before they moved to their new location that's farther out from where they used to be. But I've had a wonderful time working with them. And this series, John Dean at Dean Imaging printed the really big ones. I was able to print a smaller version, but the really, really giant ones that you see here, Dean Imaging printed those for me. So if you guys ever have a question about how you think you want something to look and what material you want it on, you know, I'd be happy to talk to you. But the trick was, if I knew ahead of time that I was going to print on metal, then I'm going to make it more contrasty, because the metal is gray. The metal is not white like a sheet of paper. So I need to have more contrast, or it's going to look washed out, because it's really like you're printing on a gray, a gray sheet.
I've had prints put on aluminum where they put a white on first, and that helps get rid of that problem.
And this one here on the right, that had the whiter, we did that with the white on the metal first, and that worked a lot better. The one on the left looked fine, but it didn't have as much, And I think once you start playing with it, that's when you start to make all these different really fun decisions. It's always a trial and error for me, but eventually you figure it out. And
what are the lenses here?
This was an old Nikon zoom lens that I had forgotten I had. I mean, it was not valuable at all. And I got a Metabones adapter so that I could put it on a different camera. So actually, I've got it backwards. This was a Canon lens, and I put it on a mount so I could put it on a Nikon digital camera. And when it was zoomed all the way out, and you had to get the angle just right or it wouldn't do this, but there would be a moment where the surface of the water, the ripples on the surface of the water, and the reflection would fuse like a piece of stained glass. And if it was too far out, like if you weren't kind of down over it, it would lose that quality. And I was being very, very careful to crop out any, limb or anything of like a real tree or a real bush. I didn't want to see any of that. This was only the reflective surface that I wanted. So all of these were composed very, very carefully, edge to edge, as I was shooting it.
Hey, Robin, on this one on the left and on the vertical brown toned one, they both have several rings moving outward. Is that from drops of water, rain, or do you throw a small handful of chat into the water to cause those, or how did you get that?
They're magical bugs. They're little twitching bugs.
Oh, okay.
And I call them the Van Gogh bugs, because they would create these brush strokes. And if you look really, really close, especially the one on the left, you can see like a little white spot in the center of the concentric circles. And it's the
bug.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You darn.
Trying to remember the name of those ones that walk on top of the water.
Oh, yeah, those are so cool.
Water striders.
Jim got it.
Yeah, that's right. So that was just me playing around. And then when I figured out that I could do that, it turned into a series and a show. And then these were printed as an installation, as a permanent installation, on a set of windows inside. So there was like a big plate glass window, and then there was a hallway with a like a glass, sort of frosted glass railing at the top. And these images were inset in that as part of a office design. And I love water motion. I know you guys do too. It's just one of those things, and it's just playing with it to get it right to a point of articulation where you could actually see like a textural stroke in it,
Gennario does pictures like this.
He does.
Yes.
Beautiful, beautiful work. So we were talking, I think I showed you this one time before, I'm not sure, but I had this idea, and it was about this time of year. So this was my tribute to springtime. I wanted to do this flora, the opening of spring when things just started to open up and bloom. And I did this in my neighbor down the street. I did it in his yard. So I dressed up my model. I put all of the effects as a camera setting. This was with the Fujifilm camera, digital camera. And there's different settings you can play with. So there's a glow filter in the camera that I set. And my idea was to try to get it as close to the final image in the camera. So this is straight out of the camera. I have not done anything to it. This is the retouched version. So looking through, this is back to the first one, looking through the background, you can see the holes looking through to the street. And, I couldn't model direct the butterfly, so I had to add that. But everything else is
That's great.
straight out of the camera. That's retouched.
Yeah. You ever seen those pictures? It was Arthur Conan Doyle who is ended up
Yes.
believed in fairies. There was a thing in England at the turn of the last century where they believed in, and these girls made fake photos and successfully passed them off to all kinds of important people as photos of fairies in their garden. They look kind of like this, but nowhere near as colorful.
They did, and that's probably, subconsciously influencing me for sure. But the idea was that photography was a science. It was a technique. It was reality. So if you had a picture of a fairy and it was a photograph, then it had to be real. And part of that was, from the belief of the day that that photography was a vehicle for recording what was really there.
Yes.
It's a fascinating story.
The fairies in the photos, though, I don't know how they got away with it. I mean, you have to have a really strong bias to believe that and to see those. And it was pretty obvious that to me, even early, the first ones, that they were cutouts,
you could see like little knife marks around it.
Crude.
And people bought it and looked, wow. I mean, it's pretty obvious.
Well,
but
for instance, Arthur Conan Doyle was also desperately trying to contact his son who had been killed in World War I.
They believed it because they wanted to.
That's correct.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the only reason.
That bias.
Hey, Robin, have you read anything, or are you a follower of Minor White?
No, but somebody else just said that to me.
Well, Minor White he's written books and so on. I've never cared that much for his photography, but there's a quotation from him that means something to me. He says, "Be quiet and wait until your subject recognizes your presence."
Huh. Wow.
So it's
I like it.
sort of like you're saying, go with your personal feelings and tastes and so on, and find it. Well, he's saying, just be quiet, and your subject will recognize your presence when it's time to shoot.
I love that. You know, I think that we have so much more control on how we want our photographs to be. You know, I think that now, you know, we can get out, we can safely go out and walk around and be out in nature and go together and be outside. I think it's a perfect time to practice this. And if you have an idea up front, or you really know what you like, then you know, then stick to it. And there's this, you know, I'll go out and I'll put in my mind, it's like, I want to see this, or, you know, it's almost like I'm asking for a sign, and it never fails that something will happen that's even crazy stuff that you would never believe could happen will happen. And it's your intention up front, it's what you want. And I think that we are all somehow like little energy fields, and our cameras are divining rods, and so we're drawing through it the images that we really, really want to take. And it's very easy to do. It's not difficult. You know, this, I set it up, so, you know, I knew what I was getting into. But I went out to do a nature walk, and I love old creepy ruins and castles. Like the places that you guys are going to go this Saturday sounds absolutely perfect. So I was out on this, my friend took me out to this nature state park that Gennario had also been telling us about at Sweetwater Creek State Park. Is that right, Gennario?
Yes. Yeah. Hold on. Yes, that's right. I'm multitasking.
So I was trying to get, you know, into the nature mode, but I had been working on a piece that was a mystery story, a book cover that would have a, you know, this romantic castle in the distance kind of thing. And when we came around and I saw this, I was just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. You know, that's moody, that's creepy, that's perfect for me, you know. And I didn't want to have, I wanted to have some color, but I didn't want to have reality, you know. So I wanted cooler tones and sort of mossy greens. And I did not expect this at all, but it's what was in my mind, you know. And I had no idea. I didn't know this mill was out there.
There's another place that you can shoot that from, and there's several places you can shoot that from and get different look pictures of that mill. And if you don't mind a hike, I can take people. I plan on taking people out there probably in April, but it's probably my favorite park. I go out there all the time, and if you didn't know, that's where they filmed part of the third Hunger Game movie, right there at that mill.
I did not know that. I did not know that.
That mill was a place where Confederate military uniforms were manufactured, and the Union Army captured the place and burned it down. And that's why it's a ruin, but it was a clothing factory on the creek, and they built chain link fences around it to keep people from destroying it. And Gennario has some pictures where he has removed the chain link fence by using content-aware fill, I think. Isn't that right, Gennario?
Yes.
That's what I was going to talk about.
Yeah, you can remove the content-aware fill. Yeah, right down there at the bottom, it'll get rid of that.
That's what I was going to tell you guys, is that, you know, you see these really, really romantic scenes and light. And I was, you know, generally I would have more weight at the bottom of this anyway, but yeah, there's that terrible fence, and there's nothing is a bigger mood killer than a chain link fence, and offensive shrubbery.
Well, people would come out there and they would steal the bricks and write graffiti on the walls. And when I first started going there was no fence. And the fence is something they had to put up because people were stealing bricks out of the place and stuff. So yeah, if you go out there late at night, I mean, not late at night, but if you go out there right at sunset, probably a half hour before sunset or so, the way the sun sets, the top half of the trees on the other side of the river are all orange.
Ooh.
So it's almost like somebody took an orange brush and just painted the top of the tree, that top portions of the trees all orange, and the rest is in shadow.
So cool.
You go out there at the right time.
Well, that's actually another thing that I was going to tell you guys about. If you find a scene or a setting that you like, go back early morning, late afternoon, different times of day, overcast day, and, you know, really work it and let the natural light do what it's going to do, you know. I went back to this later in the day to get more of a moody feel, and I was standing on my toes, I was holding the camera up and tilting it down and trying to compose like that when I couldn't really see, to try to get rid of the fence, and that was the best I could do. So I just, in the second one you can see, I just cloned it out with the content aware. See, that's with the fence, without. You see it?
Mm-hmm.
There's the fence, there it's gone.
Yeah, I think the way, this is a technical thing, that I was just working today with content aware. I love that
It's
ability.
magical.
Magic. And I think the way they do it is your computer's not doing it. I think it's going over the net, and a supercomputer at Adobe is doing the job.
No.
They do that.
I don't think so.
I don't think so. They have. I know they have one app. Adobe has one application that they send over the net, and that's when if you got excessive camera shake in an image, and it's a great image, but it's got excessive camera shake, and you want it sharp, you can actually send it over. It actually goes over the net to their supercomputers, and it does its magic and sends it. Yeah. Pulls it back, and it's cleaned up, and it's not shaking anymore. That's the only app I know of that they do that.
Oh, it goes to St. Petersburg in Russia. That's where it goes.
So, yeah, I used it today, and one of the things I sent to Elsie, and I was just amazed at what it did.
It's very cool.
Robin, that's a lovely image. Thank you. Anyway.
Oh.
Where is it? That's not that mill, is it?
Sweetwater.
That's
Oh, it is?
Same place. That.
Oh, okay.
That's looking down. So I was so happy, and I'm always trying to photograph architecture and get the trees, the tree trunks, the architecture to separate. You know, in this case, it's the light that's causing it, you know, because the dark tree against the light part of the building and against the light part of the clouds, you know, that tree coming forward, you know, in some ways works. And it's weird because it's right there. It's making the whole left side of the photograph a square. I just realized that, you know. But when you start to look at architecture, it's really hard to get it to separate from the trees. And this is a fountain that's in Cortona in the park. And I had tried for, oh gosh, I don't know. How long have I been going there? Over 30 years to photograph this fountain. And I could never photograph it because it's in the shade and the statue forms would get lost against the tree. The only way I could do it was with infrared.
I see. Yeah.
And that made the leaves light. And then for the first time, I could see the shape of it. So it took me 30 years to actually get a photograph of that fountain. But I kept at it, you know. And one other thing to add is that a photograph can have softness and still be sharp, or it can be sharp and still have a softness because it has not been over sharpened. And I'm very careful, even though this has been sharpened maybe a little bit, I'm very, very careful to not get that hard white line on the horizon. And even if I have to go back and if I am going to sharpen anything, I will lasso that horizon line so that it does not become that hard, harsh, you know, white artifact along the horizon. When you look at landscapes, when you look at paintings, as things get further back in the distance, they get cooler and lighter and softer. And it's called atmospheric perspective. And I really want to keep that in my photographs and not have that horizon line get, you know, get worked.
So either you had models or you figured out time travel.
I have tried and tried to figure out time travel. So the only way I can do it successfully is through my photographs. And those are some friends of mine that I dressed up in Victorian itchy outfits and made them run around on the beach, and I tormented and tortured them for this photograph. So yeah.
Does anybody else see on the right-hand dead tree snag a totem pole with a bird figure at the bottom of it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Looks like a crow. Looks like a big crow.
Oh, look. Huh.
I do.
With very long wings.
Yeah, well, anyway, just sort of like a totem pole figure from the Pacific Northwest with a big beak coming out of it.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I never noticed that before. That's so cool.
Where do you get your costumes from?
I have collected stuff my whole life, and I'll have stuff that, you know, maybe it'll be 10 or 20 years and at some point I will use it in a photograph. But when I grew up, I lived in a very, very small town in South Georgia, and you have to learn how to entertain yourself. So I had all of these incredible old, really not in good shape, tattered Victorian and clothes, you know, even through the 40s that had belonged to my great grandparents and my grandparents. And
Okay.
I loved them. I could not wait to play with those costumes, you know. And it started because I saw photographs of my grandmother, you know, in 1910, and I wanted to be in that time period. And I was stuck in the present. So the only recourse I had was to try to dress up and recreate those time periods as photographs. So my friends would come over to play, and I would dress them up and take pictures of them for fun. And I still do that. I still do that to this day. So
Is this an in-camera filter you used?
this was color slide film that I processed incorrectly. So it was color slide film processed as C41, and it would give me that painterly color. And I saw this a lot in paintings, you know, and there was I don't know if I can find this other, let me see if I can find this other keynote. This was from a radio show that I was on Sunday night. And we were talking about how we were influenced, you know, by all kinds of, I talked about this to you guys before when we did the painting and photography talk, but I like to think that as photographers, we can do all these painterly effects if we want to, that the painters aren't the ones that get to have all the fun, you know. So this was Edward Steichen, and on the left is one of his paintings, and on the right is one of his photographs. And he loved that tonality so much that he would do these platinum darkroom techniques where he would add all these different chemicals and processes to try to add color. And this was before color film even existed, you know. So he was trying to do this to get these kind of colors as well. These are movie stills from Tim Burton movies, and he hates bright green, you know, digital green. And even when he's working, he won't have a green screen. He makes them use this aqua blue color because he cannot stand true green, you know. So all of his movies have this desaturated tonality that takes you into another world, you know. And I think I'm trying to do the same thing, you know, with this.
Hey, earlier we talked about Fuji films and Fuji, what was their slide film, ISO50 that Mike mentioned the name of it. What was it?
Velvia.
Velvia, yeah. I sort of like some things I saw other people do with Velvia. I always hated anything I did with it, so I didn't use it much. But it had the strangest distorted green to it. It made grass look like the fake grass that you buy in a dime store to go in a Easter egg basket for an Easter egg hunt.
It did.
That was their rendition of green grass, was that.
We have Fuji camera users in our group. I think here tonight, don't they have emulations of those films built into the Fuji cameras?
That's what I did, the opening of Spring, the girl with the butterfly. That's what I used, was one of those in-camera settings. It'll only shoot as a JPEG, but because, you know, it's putting an effect on it in the camera. But it's a lot of fun to play with those. I love those. But here's the picture of my grandmother in 1910 with her outfit. So and the first time I saw that as a child, it's like, okay, I want to time travel. That's, you know, that's my era. And that's when I started dressing up and dressing other people up in old clothes.
Now, is that your grandmother? Is that right? Or
Yes.
What year was she born?
1900.
Oh, my grandmother, my mom's side was born 1903.
So
yeah, she became a nurse because of the pandemic of 1918.
Wow.
Just curious
Robin,
how close it was.
Has anyone told you you look like her?
All the time.
Yeah, with your short hair now, and she's got her hair pulled back.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, she was very cool. She was wonderful, absolutely, and very funny. And she lived to be 100.
So she had 90 years to go after those pictures.
Yes. Yes. And one other thing, I think we talked about this before, but there was an old film, the very first color film, I think, was called Autochrome. And this is a photograph from 1910, and it's a color real photograph. It's not a painting, you know, it hasn't, it hasn't been manipulated. It's just the effect of that early film.
Now, autochrome was a very interesting process. They used potato starches because they had a consistent grain size. and they would dye some of them cyan, some of them magenta, and some of them yellow, and which were the negative colors, and mix them and put them in the emulsion. And when they were developed and processed correctly, you'd get these faint colors. But anyway, the color came from dyed potato starch.
I did not know that. That is fascinating. Wow.
Would it degrade, Don? Would they degrade readily?
I don't know, probably.
This looks like Monet in his garden, huh?
Anything biological will rot over time.
Well, there were several early color processes. The history of color photography is quite an interesting thing.
Well, I think that these photographs dictated the color palette that he actually used in the famous paintings. These are his paintings. And I think that Monet used colors similar to these photographs, don't you?
Could be.
Look at that.
We have a great collection of Monets here in Chicago at the Art Institute. And there's actually a Monet exhibit, a special one up now.
Oh, wow.
Exhibit during the pandemic.
Have you been?
Sure. I live right across the street now from it.
Wow. Oh, I would love to see that. How
Yeah.
amazing is that?
Yeah. They have, I think, 6 or 9 of his haystack pictures. You know, the ones where he's trying to capture different light, different seasons and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Plus his gardens
Yeah,
and these colors.
definitely. Well, when I saw that, you know, I could get these kind of limited color palettes by either using in-camera settings or different kinds of film, processing film wrong. I'll even put, you know, the old color filters that you had for film, warming filters or, you know, blue filters. You can actually put them and shoot through that just to play around if you want to. Of course, I know you can do anything in Photoshop, and I have to work in Photoshop so much for, you know, for my work. And I love it. I absolutely love it. But if I can do it in camera, if I feel like I've tricked my camera to do an effect, then I'm extra happy, you know?
Robin, I think it's really interesting you're showing us your tonalities because when I get pictures that might come out like that, I always think, you know, it's wrong. And I think also with judging, some of the times that we hear feedback in our competitions, we're asked to correct for things like that. And so I'm really happy to see that you've done this and the way you go about it and that you like those colors and those differences. Same with your underexposures, because for many of us who've had either high key or low key kind of pictures, they tend to get criticized. And so I don't know about other people, but I tend to probably do less of it, not so much because of the competition, but because I think I'm doing bad photography. So I really have enjoyed your going through your images and seeing how you've used your tonality and again, also the underexposure elements.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, I started looking at these colors, and these are Van Gogh color palettes. And I was like, yeah, I want that. I want that in my photographs. But what you need to do is write about it as a very simple artist statement. It does not have to be a lofty, you know, long poetic kind of thing. You can just say, in this series of images, my goal was to create a cool color spectrum or warm color spectrum or, you know, whatever, sepia. And I did that because it fits my subject matter. I wanted it to have this mood. I wanted it to have a cohesive feeling. I didn't want to be distracted by full modern color, because I wanted people to think about the actual shapes they were seeing, you know, and talk about what your intention is. And once you have an artist statement and you're an artist, then you can do whatever you want. And yes, there is correct color, there's color of reality, there's correct exposure where you can get really strong detail in the highlights and the shadows, you know, where you expose for detail in the shadows. I'm trying to do away with detail. So if I can overexpose and close up a bunch of ugly detail in a shadow and it just goes away, then I'm very, very happy. You know, I've had people try to print this piece, you know, and they said, oh, it's horrible. Your blacks are all closed up. I tried and I could not get any detail to come in her hair. And I said, well, I painted it black, you know, and it's a, you know, a whole dark cutout kind of shadow thing that I created. So, you know, you could try till doomsday and you're never going to get any detail in there.
But Robin,
I wanted it to be solid black, you know.
Robin, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is a caricature. Who says you need detail? She kind of represents a character, not so much an actual detailed person. It's a caricature, so it kind of fits.
It's a graphic design.
Right, that's what I mean. So I'm not sure the detail in the hair matters. I like it the way it is. So.
And for, you know, this was a curtain, and I tilted the camera. I mean, really, this is more vertical. And then this was a projection. I took a photograph of an old 1920s powder box. The top of it, it had this really cool Art Deco pattern. And then I projected it on the background. So this is a real curtain. This is a projected image that she's against. So it's all, you know, light, shadow, you know, just using hot lights to get these warm colors. And from this whole series, it's the hot lights and then everything going totally to black. Technically, you know, there was all this detail in here that I actually closed up because I didn't want to see it, you know. But technically it's a bad photograph. You know, John Dean was printing this. This actually was purchased for the William Penn Hotel in Pittsburgh. They excavated a speakeasy that was hidden underneath the hotel. And they were doing some renovation and they uncovered it. And there was this whole secret 1920s party room and during Prohibition. And they redid it in the 1920s and they got a really big print of this. They cropped it as a square, I think. They did something to it, but that was fine. I mean, they could do, I'll show you a picture of it if I can find it in the setting. But I love it that she's in there. It's like she really did make it back to the 1920s, you know, which was my whole idea to try to recreate. But when he was trying to print it, he was saying, oh, this is not good. There's no detail in her hair. But, you know, in here, there's no detail in the background. It goes to solid black. But that was my intention. So it's technically not right, but it's what I wanted.
Where'd you get the
That's a
swan?
wonderful image. That is a really great image there.
Where'd you get the swan?
They were also from the 1920s. They had been, there were 3, and they were pets at this estate. And there was a terrible storm, and they were their pet swans, and they were frozen in the lake. And they were so upset that they had them stuffed. And there's 3 of them, you know, and they're sort of in a grouping, you know.
So how did you find this?
You know, if you think about stuffed swans, they just have a way of finding you in life. Right? If you think of a stuffed swan, then you know one will appear magically, and you can photograph it.
If you think of them, they
true.
will come.
And there's a story. You know, I'm talking about synchronicity. Each one of these women in the series turned out to really be that character in real life. So Athena is an industrial designer, and Athena is the goddess that made things to help mankind. Justice, and I actually knew her. We were friends at University of Georgia. We were in art classes together, but I didn't do this photograph of her until she had moved to Atlanta. And she said, "Well, why did you pick me to be Justice?" And I said, "Well, you know, you look very, you know, you would be a really good judge." And she said, "Well, you know, in England, I'm a line of hereditary, a family that were judges, a lineage of judges for over 500 years in England, and they had direct authority from the king to hang people without a trial. So I am Justice." And I was like, oh. And then Valkyrie, she was working at a restaurant in Midtown, and I saw her. She was the hostess, and I saw her, and I just saw these black wings. It's like, oh my gosh, it's the Valkyrie, you know. So I was very nervous, but I went up and I said, you know, I'm doing this photographic series. Would you model for me as the Valkyrie? And she said, sure, you know, I'll come over tomorrow. So she came over to my studio, and I stayed up that night and I made the wings, and we did the photograph. And as I was looking through the camera, it's like she was shape shifting into this bird creature. I don't know if you can see it, but her hand sort of has this claw-like appearance, you know, like it's turning into this bird foot, you know, and her hair started to have these feathery, it was eerie. It was so eerie. So
I remember you showing us that before, but
Yeah.
you convert people, I think.
Didn't you tell us you shot these things in your attic?
I did, and I made all the costumes. Her breastplate is made out of old lamp parts that I bolted on to her bustier, which was very uncomfortable.
It looks like a Madonna record cover.
Yeah.
I was thinking, but I didn't comment. So, yes.
But
Robin, I've got a question. You're mentioning John Dean and John Dean Photography. Many years back, quite a few years back, there was a rental darkroom called Pro Photography. And after it changed hands and so on, a guy several years younger than me worked there named John Dean. Any chance it's the same person?
I believe so.
He's probably 20 years younger than I am, at least.
He really is a master printer. And, you know, I would print something and I would think it would be really, really good, you know, and I would make a print. And then if I needed a really big one, he's printed all my big exhibition stuff. And he has all different kinds of printers and inks and carbon-based inks that he does work for museums and photographers worldwide. So it's amazing. But I would say, oh, look, I did this print. And then he would print it, and it would be so much better. And I would get mad. I'd go, well, I really worked on that. Why does yours look so much better? And he said, that's what I do. That's all I've done my entire life. So I am going to be good at it. And he really is a master. So the carbon-based inks that he's printing with are really cool too. So we should get him to talk to us sometime.
Have you ever seen Carbro prints or color Carbro prints?
No.
Well, Carbro was a high saturation black and white process, as the name might imply, but there were also color Carbros. And color Carbros were related to dye transfer, where each color layer was printed separately, and you could put, you wanted to change the tonality, you could put down 2 yellow matrices instead of 1, or 2 cyans instead of 1, or whatever, to vary the color or the saturation and so on. And people who were good at it made these wonderful color prints. I'm talking about 1920 through 1940 approximately. And they lasted forever. They didn't fade. They were quite expensive to buy those prints.
So it's really like screen printing, where you lay down.
No, it's not at all screen printing. It's photographic sharpness. But color Carbro was done using a one-shot color camera, which is another story. A one-shot color camera would use, it had beam splitter pellicles inside behind the lens. These were used 4x5-inch film, but they would use 3 black and white images. Each one would record a separate color. So color separation was done in the camera in one shot. I think 2 of the black and whites were panchromatic and 1 was ortho, as I recall. I never did it. I'm not that old. But anyway, absolute master process.
I'm so interested in that. And I think there's a real fascination with what the technique would do, you know? And for me to go back and use some of those old processes, I would love that.
Well, dye transfer is still doable, but I don't know anybody who's doing it, but I'm sure you could get the materials and do it if you had the money and were patient enough.
And I think the trick is if your subject matter is really fits with, you know, with what your technique is, then it's worth it. You know, it's worth trying to figure out.
Yeah.
You know,
you could do dye transfers by using a color separation process from a transparency. Just like color transparencies ran through a separation house to generate printing negatives and printing plates for color printing with inks for catalogs, magazines, posters, etc. Well, it was color separation was a step between the transparency and the printing plates. But I digress.
No, I'm very interested in that. And, you know, this was supposed to be like a book in a box. So I wrote the description of each character before I did any of the photographs. And I know you guys have seen this before, but I wanted it to have that old color, you know, like from the 1920s when they first started having color illustrations in books. You know, I wanted it to look soft like that. So the printing process was on a paper to kind of give it that feel, you know.
Ever heard of a photographer named Paul Outerbridge?
Yeah.
Well, Paul Outerbridge, I think he was a kinky person and his photography was awful to my thinking, but he was quite good at dye transfer printing and color Carbro. He was a master at color Carbro also. So if you look up Paul Outerbridge, you can probably see some examples of his work in those genres.
I'm going to look all that up. I mean, that's just so really, really interesting. But, you know, and here I wrote, oh, here's my hand modeling debut. Look. Ooh la la. But what I was saying, you know, if you want to have an excuse, this is the artist statement for that whole piece. So if you write down your intention and you're saying, I meant to do this, I meant to, you know, overexpose and blow out my highlights, or I meant to do this, or I meant to make the color weird, you know, because it fits my subject matter. This is the story I'm telling. This is my personal symbolism. This is how I want it to look. And that gives you total creative freedom to do, you know, whatever you want.
Some of
And
those colors that you used also look like when Polaroid film gets old. Do you know what I mean? Do you remember
yes,
some of the older pictures, they get that kind of greenish or sometimes that more gold look as the paper ages or the
yeah,
image
yeah,
ages.
I love that. I love that. And, you know, lens flare and that's supposed to be bad, and light leaks around the edges, you know, anything that speaks to, you know, the reality of, you know, what it's made of. I wanted this to have torn edges, you know, like the old books that don't have the perfectly cut edge. I made sure that my paper all the way around was rough. And when I framed them, I floated it so that you could see the edge of the paper all the way around, so it looked like a page from a book, from an old book, you know, that didn't have perfect trimmed edges.
It's called a deckled edge.
Yes.
And they used to tear the paper along a sharp ruler type thing, you know, instead of cutting it, it was torn. It was actually torn.
And I did
Oh,
that.
a ripper. I used to have a ripper. I may still have a ripper somewhere.
Yeah.
So that edge right there, that's what I did. I tore it on a metal straight edge to get that. And I also rounded the corners because I ultimately, when this was floated in a frame, the frame had rounded corners like that too. So, you know, I've really obsessed over every detail of what I've done. And I even think about how is it going to be